Romanticizing
Hello friends, how are you? My name is Arith Härger and today I'm going to talk about Valkyries. This was a video requested by one of my patrons, Ms. Audrey Hoyt. Thank you so much, madam. And I must apologize for submitting this video on a Sunday. I know, it's usually on Wednesdays, but this request was made not so long ago and I didn't want the patron in question to wait that long for a video, because I schedule all my videos 2 months beforehand and I didn't want Ms. Audrey to wait 2 months for a video. So I fit this video somewhere in the middle of November. So yes, whenever you see a video of mine on a Wednesday, you are watching me as I was 2 months ago, which means someday you will watch a video and I've been dead for at least 2 months. This was a cheerful assessment. All right, now let's go straight to business. I'm going to talk about Valkyries, what they were, what they became, and then a little quick statement on women in the Norse society, so we might understand a bit about the role of women and maybe the reason why Valkyries are female. And then a bit of archaeology to reinforce my statements. Let's get started. Valkyries or Valkyriur, when we think about them, the idea that comes to mind is quite simple. They are the choosers of the fallen, female helping spirits of the god Odin, who choose the bravest of the brave from among the dead in a battlefield and bring them to Valhalla. Young, beautiful women with a very tender touch that take care of men and bring them to the next life. However, originally, Valkyriur were probably considered demons of the dead to whom the warriors slain in battle belonged to. Not demons in a Christian sense of hellish creatures of evil coming from the infernal realms to torment people. Demons in the sense of being brutal and violent spiritual entities, the personification of a painful and horrible death suffered in battle, dreadful creatures of death. The name Valkyries in Old Norse Valkyriar derives from the Old Norse Valr, not the dead but the corpses lying on the battlefield, and from Hjosa, which is to choose. So they simply mean those who choose the slain, the corpses of the slain. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, Valkyries had a very sinister background, far from the romantic concepts we have today. They have always been the choosers of the slain, but not in the sense that they only picked the dead to bring them to Valhalla. In truth, they chose who would die in battle. They sealed the fate of warriors and used terrible magic, battle magic as we will see further ahead, to ensure that the ones they marked for death would really die and they would get them. Valkyries changed with time due to the mixture of different cultures and similar concepts. There was a shift in the interpretation of the Valkyries when the concept of Valhalla changed from a battlefield to a warrior's paradise. Valhalla was a field of the dead. It was a concept belonging to the underworld and the pre-Christian concepts of death. Later on, Valhalla was transformed into a paradise for warriors. And I repeat, a paradise. A more romantic version of an afterlife place to encourage warriors to have suicidal advances towards their enemies, taking away the fear of death, because in the next life it would be great to be in Valhalla. The original concept of Valhalla was nothing like the perception we have today. So in this aspect, the Valkyries being linked to the act of bringing the warriors to Valhalla were compared to the Shield Girls, which were Irish female warriors who lived exactly like the Heneriar in Valhalla. So we already have this cultural mixture that influenced the interpretation of the Valkyries and changed them from demons to women, to shield maidens. Other cultural examples, for instance, to the Anglo-Saxons, there were the Valkyrie, who were either malevolent female demons or sorceresses, female witches, female spirits of butchery, slaughter. Although, to the Norse, the concept of the Valkyrie seems to be much closer to being spiritual extensions of the god Odin himself, as I've explained in the video about the parts of the self which can be divided into different categories and spiritual realities. Valkyries seem to be projections of Odin, just as the ravens, his ravens, Hugin and Munin, are projections of Odin's conscious, and these wolves, Geri and Freki, symbolize the change of Hamre and are the fylgjur of Odin. Please, for more information on those concepts, watch my video about the parts of the self. Speaking of Hamre and the change of appearance, shapeshifting, in Volundarkvida, for example, it depicts a group of women alluded to be Valkyries who are unable to return to their normal shape after leaping into a human Hamre by shedding swan skins away from their bodies. The swan skins having been stolen by a man, Volundr, and his two brothers, and they forced the three women to remain in human Hamre and marry them. The women never again returned to their original state. This is an interesting account connecting Valkyries to female shape-shifting magic, which reinforces this shamanic idea of the Valkyries being spiritual projections of Odin and the use of shape-shifting magic. Also, their original form isn't the human form, which again helps to understand that they were once considered female spiritual entities, but not with a female human form. So, as I've said, Valkyries are closely associated with Odin, and I don't believe that changed even when they were demons of death. They interfered in battle on behalf of Odin, determining the fate of the warriors as supernatural female demons of death who fulfilled Odin's wishes and led the chosen warriors slain in battle to Odin himself. And this is why Valkyries are called Odin's Meyjar, Odin's girls, and Ulskmeyjar, wish girls, girls who fulfill Odin's wishes. Due to this shift on the original concept of the Valkyries, these spiritual entities became highly popular in heroic poetry, losing a great portion of their demonic characteristics to become more human in nature, and therefore capable of falling in love with mortals, as is the case of numerous Valkyries such as Sigrifa and Brunhilde, who fall in love with mortal man. And, of course, during the 19th century we have Willem Richard Wagner, who helped to romanticize the Valkyries in his theatrical and opera compositions. There is a very interesting account which I find fascinating in a very twisted and macabre way, which shows us the essence of the Valkyries as demons of death and the use of battle magic. The account in question is the poem Daradarkjod, which dates probably from the early 10th century, and it's part of Njol's saga. The poem describes a scene where Valkyries weave a fabric of battle, which we might interpret as an act of shaping the outcome of a specific battle. This account describes how spinning and weaving was done, giving the details of the tools that were used and the techniques, which links this activity to the act of seidr. Although in this case the actual tools are replaced by body parts, because this act of weaving is connected to battle magic. The scene described in the poem involves 12 Seidkonur, women who perform seidr, who are also Valkyries, doing battle magic in the most horrible and destructive way imaginable that gives us the idea of warfare and the brutality involved. The scene goes like this. 12 men ride towards a women's quarters of a house where they completely disappear. A man named Dorudur sees this and goes to investigate. Through a window, he sees 12 women set up a warp-weighted loom. The Valkyries are setting up a warp of intestines using men's heads for weights. The handle rods are bloody spears. Arrows serve as pin beaters, and when the weft has been passed through a shed, they beat it with swords. This is a description of both the work of spinning and weaving, greatly linked to the act of seidr, the horrors of the battlefield, and the use of battle magic, which in nature seems closer to necromancy than anything else. Battle magic was another important aspect of seidr, to have influence on the outcome of a battle. This is what the Valkyries in this account are doing, and in fact their aggressive and destructive behavior seems to be what seidr is about, in most cases actually, and not that idea of witchcraft and being closer to nature and do all sorts of magic connected to positive things such as divination and clairvoyance, healing, to influence good luck and a good weather. Don't get me wrong, those were also included in seidr, but seidr was also used for the exact opposite of these things. I think it's also important to refer the names of the Valkyries in this account and what they mean. The Valkyries' names are all battle-related kennings. For instance, Hildre, battle, Jortrilmur, sword noise, Sangridr, very violent, very cruel, Svipul, unstable, Gunra, war, Gondul, either wolf or staff of sorcery. So all of these Valkyries are connected to battle and battle magic, and also terrible emotions present in a battlefield. These Valkyries weave the battle and its outcome by setting up a terrible loom with blood-stained grey cloths made of human intestines and heads, chanting magic spells while moving back and forth in the process of weaving. There is this perception of a terrible magical atmosphere of bloodthirsty women screaming, eager to engage in combat and creating a bloodbath. They themselves seem to have similarities with the Norns, but in this case they weave the fate of man in battle. As previously said, they choose the ones who would die. I think this is a very interesting account that gives us a good panorama of certain magical acts within seidr and also the essence of the Valkyries as demons of death, before being humanized and romanticized into beautiful women who take men to Valhalla. This poem was probably written by someone who knew pretty well the horrors of the battlefield, and not some poet far away from the apocalyptic madness of combat who creates romantic notions of war to encourage people to go to battle by evoking notions of honor and duty and how poetic death is. So Nowadays, we have a more romantic version of the Valkyries because due to industrialization, for instance, during the 19th century, people were turning to older pagan concepts that somehow mistook as being magical and related to nature, precisely because the era they lived in was completely shattering their lifestyle and the environment. So every pagan background was highly romanticized as an attempt to go back to the origins rather than embracing the process of industrialization, which was a shock in the cultural background of the 19th century European populations. Many things which were once brutal and portrayed the harsh realities people lived in during heathen times were romanticized to create an idealistic past that should be taken into consideration to fight off the shocking changes of the 19th century. So far, as we have seen, Valkyries were one of the most important mythical beings in pre-Christian Scandinavia, playing an important role in the religious and spiritual concepts for both warriors in general and for women. They are linked to death cults and with destiny, as well as having the function of guardianship, being spiritual entities who take the dead warriors into the afterlife. The Valkyries embody the feminine spirits who guide and protect the individuals and the community. In some funeral stelae and in some pendants, the Valkyries are represented in a more domesticated way, in traditional women's garments and sometimes carrying mead horns. But in some occasions, we have pendants and figurines of Valkyries dressed for battle, with shields, spears and swords, and also axes, and in battle gear. And those archaeological artifacts were found in women's graves, which shows us that women not only had a connection with Odinic cults and Seidr, but also with war itself. We must not forget that Seidr was indeed an activity greatly linked to women, especially with priestesses, Gidur, and that many religious activities were performed by women. Women are thought to have been heavily involved in sacrificing to fertility deities and other deities. And some fertility priests and priestesses may actually have been of high or even royal birth. Women had high positions as sacrificial and ritual leaders, which is why women's grave mounds can only belong to women with high social status. When it comes to Viking Age burial mounds, with absolute certainty, we know that those were created for the most prominent and powerful in the Norse society. And that leads me to talk a bit about Viking Age burial mounds for women. The Sognefjord mounds in Bergen, Norway, for instance, most of the burial mounds in that area are of women. And in their graves there are loads of weapons, and the most abundant is the axe, the weapon greatly used in battle, but also in domestic affairs, of course. Axes were commonly used by warriors in the battlefield, but also as powerful symbols of high social status. So we cannot say with absolute certainty that these women were indeed warriors. But certainly there is this link to battle, war, maybe even battle magic, and religious roles connected with warfare. So in a certain way, Valkyries being female and later on being human females may be related to the role of women as warriors in pre-Christian Scandinavia. And obviously, I know for most it's hard to believe in warrior women in pre-Christian Scandinavia. But we must not disregard the fact that Viking warrior women have been found most of them during the 19th century, and that makes an outstanding difference in the perceptions we have of warrior women. Actual warrior women have been found, because the truth is, these warrior women for over a century have been misidentified as males, because archaeologists acculturated in a Western society with strictly defined gender roles view men alone as warriors. This is a medieval Western cultural construction that doesn't fit into the perspective of hidden cultures, especially of Northern Europe. We assume that men alone are warriors, but these assumptions are inaccurate. In archaeological contexts of Northern Europe, gender roles cannot be applied to every culture or every civilization of the past. Many societies of the past didn't have gender roles. Warrior women existed, they have been found and continue to be found. We have at least one very famous Viking warrior woman that comes in the sagas, Frøydis Riksdottir, and she wasn't the only one. So this reality in the Norse society might help us to understand the creation of Valkyries as female warriors, because warrior women were a reality. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and a very special thanks to my patron, Miss Haldre, who requested this video. Thank you so much for watching, see you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag!